that we and all of creation, all that we think of as other, is also the same as that. It's one continuum from top to bottom, and like a waterfall, there is a beginning at the top and there is a flow at the bottom, but they're all the same. There's a high and a low, but it's all the same waterfall, and so it is with us. There is a transcendence and there is an immanent, but it is interlaced, interfused with each other. One is the other. This is that, and that is this, and we know it by a relatively seeing more there and less here, or less here and more there, but the fact is we are the same stuff. So I would like to talk about perspective today. Perspective, I'll read you a definition, middle view or prospect. The appearance of things relative to one another as determined by their distance from the viewer. And this is a quote from Charles Mann in 1491. But the flaws in perspective often appear obvious only after they have been pointed out. Here's some synonyms for perspective. Opinion, standpoint, angle, view. This one I don't get. Shoes. Point of view, vantage point, mind, interpretation, slant, eye view, frame of reference, perception, impression, judgment, spin, conviction, sentiment, verdict, mindset, persuasion. I'd like to read you what Alan Watts says, if I can find it. We seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. Wait for it. For we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent, but which were given to us by our society. I've noticed that, the yin-yang symbol. There's a fish that is black and the fish that is white, with a dot of black in the white one and a dot of white in the other one, and so it's and the way to really consider that is that it's a moving thing in a circle. So one becomes the next and the next and so on and so forth. And I started thinking about the nature of politics these days, and the reason I don't really want to make this a political speech. I would like to make this a speech about us becoming the wise ones. And in becoming the wise ones, we may also have an opinion, and we may defend that opinion, and we may be strong and vote in a particular way and campaign or whatever. But I would really like us to also hold a much broader perspective at the same time, to be both in it and yet not of it. As Jesus would say, be in the world, but be ye not of it. So that you can live your life, but you can also have wisdom. You can do what needs to be done, but you can also have perspective, a perspective that is not limited to your social conditioning or the language that you're used to speaking. And I realize that many times, if you've noticed that over the years, we claim that some states are red, some states are blue, and some are purple. Have you noticed that? North Carolina was kind of shifting back and forth over the time, and for a while at last it was red, now it's considered purplish, if not purple. And yet there are two cities, Charlotte and Raleigh, that are kind of like the dots inside the yin-yang symbol. So if you happen to live outside one of those places, your tendency is to think in a certain way, and if you live within it, you think a certain way. And so much of it is determined. I lived in California before I lived here. I lived in Northern California, and you just don't get any more single-minded than that. And yet, within California, there is Orange County. There is a different dot within that very red dot within a blue state. And so, really, how did that happen? How did it get so concentrated in certain areas? And it just, I think, because of what Alan is saying, we are more conditioned by our surroundings than we are probably clear about. Our neighbors agree with us. Now our social media agrees with us. We tend to choose conversations with people that we have like-minded, and we tend to dislike bumper stickers that say something contrary to our popular belief. So we just have to realize that our opinions are really quite influenced by the outer world. And so our perspective needs to be investigated, because as Charles Mann said, we usually don't notice our perspectives until someone points it out. So let me give you an example. Two boys are playing hockey on a pond in a park in Toronto when one is attacked by a rabid Rottweiler. Thinking quickly, the other boy takes his stick, wedges it down the dog's collar, twists, breaking the dog's neck. A reporter who is strolling by sees the incident and rushes over to interview the boy. Here's what he writes in his notebook. Young Leafs, this is sports references for those of you who have no perspective on sports. Young Leafs fan saves friend from vicious animal. But I'm not a Leafs fan, the little hero replied. Sorry, since we're in Toronto, I just assumed you were, said the reporter, and starts again. Little Jays fan rescues friend from horrific attack. He continued writing in his notebook. I'm not a Jays fan either, the boy said. I assumed everyone in Toronto was either a Leafs or a Jays fan. What team do you root for? The reporter asked. I'm a Montreal Canadian, the child said. Reporter starts a new page and writes in his notebook, little French delinquent from Montreal kills beloved family pet. We tend to judge people according to what we know of them, right? Because we get some mental image, some impression, and those impressions may be quite subtle, and they may be infusing our thoughts so thoroughly that we typecast people almost instantly. I do it. I watch TV. I already know what the character is going to be like, because, or at least I assume I know, because I have that programming in me. Here's another story. While two families were waiting in line to see the Washington Monument, their two 5-year-old boys were getting acquainted. My name is Joshua. What's yours? Asked the first boy. Adam, replied the second. My daddy is a doctor. What does your daddy do for a living? Asked Joshua. Adam proudly replied, my daddy is a lawyer. Honest? Asked Joshua. No, just the regular kind. Okay, prelims out of the way. One of the profound philosophies that is somewhat foreign to most Americans is this idea of Taoism. We kind of approach it when we say, oh, that's really Zen. But Taoism is a brilliant way of perceiving the world, and quite different than what we have in the West here. In the West, we have this history, and therefore predominant way of thinking about it, that God is an external being outside of creation that manipulated stuff to make the universe as it is. And after making the universe, or before making the universe, depending on your timing, God made us. And we are a made thing. We are a thing, a creature that is like a pot, or is like an automobile or something like that. We have many metaphors for ourselves, that this being, which very much resembles humans, oddly enough, looks and acts so much like us. Remember the gods of Greece? The gods of Greece were very filled with foibles and jealousies and disloyalty to each other. They acted just like humans, right? And then we have the Jewish God that for so long in ancient way of thinking about God was also jealous and angry and would smite you down and would punish you if you didn't do right and would kill off your enemies if you did well. And all that was very tribal in a sense. And so we've grown up with that, and it infuses our language. It infuses our language so much it's hard to realize just how much we have absorbed it. And so when people talk about God, they say the man upstairs, or they say they have an image that looks like something from the back of a soapbox, a big man with a white beard and up in the heavens. And this image has limited our ability to perceive life in a different way, because there are other ways of seeing the world as it is. It is not necessary in Taoist philosophy to have an external being that created the universe. You don't have to have an external anything that created the universe. There is a concept, especially very popular in China, that essentially there is a co-arising. It happens that things are just here. They're not so much like, so we've carried it so far that our most popular way of thinking about the creation of the universe is a Big Bang now, which is a little bit different than God created it, but it always starts with a boom. It starts with a happening. And in some cultures, it's always a static state. It's always been here. It's always assumed that it was always here and always will be. There's no time in that sense that there is a endurance of things that is never has a beginning. Fair? But coming back to the living of it, the living of this is to see that whenever we look at something, it is not the thing so often that we see, but our words or our thoughts around the thing that we recognize. We recognize something as being other than us because we have said so. We have in our language, we have in our habits of thought, that there is a this and there is a that. And if it's not this, it's that. And there is a gap between the two. The gap between the two is pure and distinct. This is not that, that is not this. That's the way we see it here. It's a dualistic way of thinking about it. It's very easy to understand because our minds, certainly here in the West, think in dualistic thought. We see contrast, we see light, therefore we know we can recognize darkness. So it makes sense in some very profound way that light and dark are this and that. But in the perspective of the Tao, there is no dark without light. You would not know, you would not even be able to distinguish, even if you didn't have a word for it, darkness versus light without each having the other. And so, in essence, to really understand the concept of dark, you have to see the light, and vice versa. And so this concept means essentially that when you name a thing as other, you have made an artificial separation because the two poles of the same thing are fundamental to each other. To know that you have a left hand, you have to have a right side. There has to be a sense of opposites. And so it's easy for us to think that way, but there is a more transcendent way of thinking, a way that is not based on either or, not based on this and that, you and me, high and low, dark and light, not based on that, but sees the totality of it. I think one of the easiest ways to approach this might be our perspective from one of the moon shots. Do you remember when the astronauts took the picture and they saw the Earth rising as essentially a moon on their moon? And the Earth was no longer divided into even continents, but it was just one big globe. There was no boundary, there was no nationality, there was no way of saying which was a communist or a capitalist state. We didn't have that. All we had was this blue and white ball with a little bit of brown showing up and rising up through absolute darkness. And this world, which has been broken in our minds into so many this and that's, was really just one thing. And even if you saw there was no straight line on the whole thing. It was all curves and squiggles and stuff. Itself was a circle. And yet when we sit on the shoreline and look out, it looks flat. With maybe the slightest bit of curve. It's hard to recognize that we're sitting on a globe spinning around very fast. And that all these things that we see in the sky are like us. They're bodies of something. They're not dots. They're not related to us. We are related to it. We circle around the sun. It's not like the sun circles around us. But we, for thousands of years, thought it was the other way around, didn't we? Because our point of view was that we're in the center of the universe and you can't make it otherwise, right? Remember Copernicus? He didn't have an easy time of it. The whole thing was, if you say, I'm going to change your perspective, you're easily castigated into some sort of heretic or lunatic. Lunatic makes the perfect word here, doesn't it? And so this whole idea of shifting your perspective is one that I think is something we should strive for, a flexibility in our minds, so that we can see others not only as that, but also as this. That we see them as us rather than seeing them only as other. And the habit is really, really profoundly deep in us. And the tendency to be afraid of that which is other is quite large. I've been talking with several people lately, and they go, if I see a snake, I'm going to scream. And I think, well, in North Carolina, there are a couple of poisonous snakes, but they're not everywhere, and most of them are not. And really, there's nothing to be afraid of, particularly if you don't go up and try and pick them up. I mean, it's like you could just be okay with it being there. I would not have that. And I think to myself, that's a perspective somewhat natural to the human condition, because some snakes are dangerous, and if you don't know, you better be cautious. But the idea that we should categorize everything that looks like a poison snake as dangerous is not making clear, conscious decisions. And the clarity and the conscious decisions that we need to make to find that others are not danger to us is the same problem as we have with snakes. There are some people who are dangerous, but most people are not. I've traveled a lot in my early years, mostly to third world countries, mostly to places that my parents' friends would think, oh, you wouldn't dare go there. Must be really dangerous. And you go, if you've been there, you usually go, and actually it feels safer than here. Most people aren't armed there. And they're not angry. And they're kind to strangers. And they're not worried about having too much, having all the money in the world. They're just happy to share what little they have. I mean, it's a very different world than we thought it was from our perspective here. And so this idea of this and that is not wrong, but it can be a plague upon our peace. It can keep us from actually looking at someone and seeing who they really are. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I'll bet you our human mind these days works so fast that by the time you get to hello, you've already made up most of your mind about the person. And that if they said something that surprised you, it would probably not even sink in at first. Have you noticed? You would still carry on that whole way of thinking about them. You would be the one who was, and then of course, you know they're doing the same thing to you, right? Only from this, we're in the right. We're like pre-Copernicus. Copernicus. Hey, there's pre any of those guys. We're before all that. We just realize, we think we are the center of the universe. And every single individual has the same perspective, be it a mosquito, a lion, or a human. The world revolves around them. That is their perspective. And they have snakes in their world they're afraid of. Consciously, unconsciously, right or wrong, they have fears. And so we walk around in these little not so much self-absorbed, but self-assured that we're right. Perspectives, slants, shoes of ways of thinking. We think we own the truth. And yet, if you were standing over there, this perspective would be, you're wrong. You can't be right because I'm right. Right? And that's okay if you want to live at that level. The level of conflict, the level of fear, the level of distrust. But if you want to live at the level of peace, understanding, and compassion, then you must move to a transcending idea that this and that are concepts of the human mind and not really the way it is. I've said this before, but when you look at a tree, we have a pretty clear idea what a tree is, but functionally, a tree does not stop at the bark or the leaves. The leaves are what exchange the gases that allow the rest of life to go on, and the roots are in the ground, and the microbes are on that, and they exchange gases and information with other trees, and the bark is just the edge of the skin, but without it, the birds couldn't land on it, and beetles couldn't bore in it. All of that is of a piece, but in our minds, it's clearly a tree is a tree, and there's no thing else there, but that's a tree. No, I know the boundary of that. Functionally, though, you don't, unless you see the whole ecosystem that goes with it. And so it is. I was talking to a spiritual conspirator who basically was saying, don't you think it's odd that it's 50-50 in this country? How'd that happen, right? Now, I don't know if that's, but maybe it's just the nature of things, that when you have A, you're going to have B. When you have this, you're going to have that. When you have high, you're going to have low. When you have left, you have right. When you have red, you're going to have blue. And maybe it's going to be in about equal balance. I don't really know. Maybe the yin-yang is more symbolic than we know. 50-50. Perhaps the whole world is 50-50. Maybe all of your body is 50-50. All the earth is 50-50. Maybe the planets are 50-50. I don't know. But I would like to say that the perspective that we bring to it could be more like there's only one. There's only one of us here. Haven't many of us in this room said, couldn't they just be Americans? Couldn't we just be Americans and let that be it? You wouldn't have to hate me and I wouldn't have to hate you. Couldn't we love each other like Americans? And the beauty of a great external conflict is we take all our otherness and can project it over there, right? That's what World War II so fantastic. We could just take almost everybody in and say, well, we're all against those guys over there. We're one country. We're Americans. Then we go off to the Olympics going, USA, USA, right? No matter what sport they're in or what team they play for politically. I want to read you something from a book on Taoism. It's a little tricky to read, so you'll have to listen really closely. Nothing is better than lucidity. Everything is that in relation to other things, and this in relationship to itself. We may not be able to see things from a standpoint of that, but we can understand them from the standpoint of this. Therefore, it may be said that that derives from this, and that this is dependent upon that. With me so far? Such is the notion of cogenesis of this and that. But there is really a this, but is there really a this and that? Or is there really no this and no that? Where this and that cease to be opposites, there lies a pivot point of the way, or the Tao. Only when the pivot point is located in the center of the circle of things can we respond to their infinite transformations. The transformations of right are infinite, and so are the transformations of wrong. Therefore, it is said that nothing is better for responding to them than lucidity. This brings us back to a little spiritual note I'd like to finish on. When we have done this and that, it's part of the notion that I've been often working against in this church, which is the idea of that being the divine and this being the person. And as with the other things socially and redundantly done over in our language, etc., when we make that, make God that, we make this other. And when we do that, we negate the qualities that we attribute to that, and we become only this. Does that make sense? And so this and that applies very well to this lucidity about this and that, applies very well on the horizontal. But it also applies on the vertical. That we and all of creation, all that we think of as other, is also the same as that. It's one continuum from top to bottom, and like a waterfall, there is a beginning at the top and there is a flow at the bottom, but they're all the same. There's a high and a low, but it's all the same waterfall, and so it is with us. There is a transcendence and there is an immanent, but it is interlaced, interfused with each other. One is the other. This is that, and that is this, and we know it by relatively seeing more there and less here, or less here and more there, but the fact is we are the same stuff. Back to Alan Watts. So in this idea, then, everybody is fundamentally the ultimate reality, because there is no break between you and other. So you must be the same as the ultimate reality. There is no, we appear from, I'll give you another way of perceiving this. If you think about yourself, you think of this as it. And that's dense and it has weight and mass, but if you look really closely, With an electron microscope, you see right through all this and it becomes space. So space, you're more space than person. You're more transcendent than immanent. You are it. So this practice of feeling like you don't belong on this earth, or you are not part of the one presence, one power. This is an experience cultivated by this and that, but it is no more true than the soil is not the tree, and the tree is not the soil. So with this idea, then, everybody is fundamentally the ultimate reality, not God in a politically kingly sense, the old man with the beard, but God is a sense of being the self, the deep down basic whatever there is. And you are all that, only you're pretending to not be. And that is perfectly okay to pretend you're not, to be perfectly convinced, because this is the notion of drama. We play small for the fun of it. But when the play is, even during the play, you know you are part of the whole and not just this. Let us pray. Let us imagine for a moment that we can send our awareness out in all directions. We send it out and out. We send our awareness out and out. And where would it stop? For there is no limit to your awareness. There is no end to this moment. The present is always present. The awareness is unbounded. There it turns out that we are not separate and isolated, but a continuum of the one. And so we let it be, in our minds, in our actions, in our hearts. And so it is. Amen. I hope you got something out of today's service. We intend to bring you things that will help you in your life become more of who you want to be, give you the freedom of forgiveness and the hope of expectancy that your life will unfold in a way that brings you joy, happiness, and is a contribution to the world. If you would like to contribute to this ministry, please go to unitytriangle.org, hit the donate button, and it will lead you into an easy way of doing that. We thank you for your attention and look forward to seeing you again here.